According to a 2024 study, the average UK adult now lives 25 miles away from where they were born. But that does vary depending on where you started from. So people in the north only move about 8 miles. People down south move significantly further. In the Midlands, people who start here generally move about 10 miles and no more than that. And I thought that was quite interesting. When I lived in, I had a year in Lower Gornal, which is a little village just outside Dudley. And in Lower Gornal, unless your grandparents were born in Lower Gornal, you were an outsider. And it was a very small village. I went to the hairdressers and I'm talking to the hairdresser. She's like, well, where have you come from? So I explained I was living there for a year while I was working out of university, but originally I'd come from London. And this hairdresser was probably in her 30s. She was so shocked. And she just said to me, she said, I did go to horse riding camp once. I stayed for a week, but I came home because I was homesick. And that was the furthest she'd ever gone from her home. And that was the longest she'd ever been away from Lower Gornal. And as far as she was concerned, you were born there, you stayed there, and you never went anywhere else. And people coming in were just unheard of. Apparently there is a trend at the moment, people are moving out of cities, which is not surprising, I think, given that people can work from home a bit more now. But there's lots of different reasons for moving. Sometimes you have to move, and you might need to move for work or different things happen. Friends of ours from church are originally from Nigeria. They were living in Coventry from a work point of view, and now Toyin's got a job in Canada. So they've had to go there, and that's a massive move for work. And the whole family are moving to join him there. The reason I'm talking about this, which I hope some of you have figured out, but maybe not, we're starting a series on the Book of Ruth, as Darren said, and each week we're looking at a different chapter of this book. At the start of this book, we find that Naomi moved a long way from her home due to the famine in Bethlehem. So I'm going to show you a very short video clip that just gives you a summary of this first chapter, and then we'll carry on talking.
Book of Ruth. It's a brilliant work of theological art, and it invites us to reflect on the question of how God is involved in the day-to-day joys and hardships of our lives. There are three main characters in the book: Naomi the widow, Ruth the Moabite, and Boaz the Israelite farmer. And their story is told in 4 chapters that are beautifully designed. Let's just dive in and see how this all unfolds. Chapter 1 opens with this line: in the days when the judges ruled. And it reminds us of the very dark and difficult days from the book of Judges. And here we meet an Israelite family in Bethlehem, struggling to survive through a famine. And so in search of food, they moved on to the land of Moab, Israel's ancient enemy. And there the father of the family dies, and the sons marry 2 Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. And then the sons, they die too. And so they leave only Naomi and these new daughters-in-law. And so Naomi, she has no reason to stay anymore. And so she tells her new daughters-in-law that she's moving back home. And Naomi, she knows that the life of an unmarried foreign widow in Israel is going to be very hard. And so she compels the women to stay behind. Orpah agrees, but Ruth does not. She shows remarkable loyalty to Naomi. And she says, wherever you go, I'm going to go. Your people will become my people, and your God will become my God. And so the two of them return to Israel together. And the chapter concludes with Naomi changing her name to Mara, which means bitter in Hebrew, and she laments her tragic fate. Chapter 2 begins.
So we're going to end there. Chapter 2 is Ursula next week, so whether she continues with that video or whether she says something else, that's up to her. When I was 11, my parents decided we were moving house. They wanted more space, and we moved about a mile up the road. I obviously had no say in this because I was a child, and I was quite scared of the idea of moving. I didn't like change. I still don't really like change, but I was worried about that. But I knew that we were moving to a nice house, and I was pleased that I'd get my own room and we had a garden that we were moving to. Later, when I was 17, my parents divorced and moved to 2 different houses. And the choice I had this time was whether to go with my mum or to go with my dad. If I went with my mum, I had to share a bedroom with my sister, and I lived a lot further away from my school. If I went with my dad, I was a lot closer to school, but actually, my sister wouldn't be living at the same place as me. So I actually chose to live near my dad's, not just because my sister wasn't going to be there, but I think it possibly helped my relationship with my sister not to be in the same house as her. But yeah, I had that choice. And thankfully, ever since, I've been able to make my own choice about moving. I moved from London to Birmingham when I went to Aston University, and then I've moved to Coventry after university. And I've always been quite apprehensive about moving to somewhere new, but excited, looking forward to where I'm going and the new stage in my life. Joseph, my eldest son, he left home nearly 3 years ago now to go to university in York. And it didn't take him long before he started to talk about going back home to York rather than going back to university. So York became his home very quickly. And he is getting married in July, and York is going to be his permanent home. So he's really gone. But he is excited about that move, and he likes the city and all of that stuff. So at the start of the story of Ruth, Naomi's husband, Elimelech, is what I'm going to call him, made the choice to move his family, Naomi and the 2 sons, away from the famine in Bethlehem. But it was probably quite a difficult choice for them because they were leaving everything they knew, but because of the famine, otherwise they would have had to starve. They left the place where people were worshipping God, and they moved into Moab, a foreign place where the Moabites worshipped lots of different gods. The 2 sons married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth, and then Elimelech died, and then the 2 sons died, which left Naomi and the 2 widows destitute. In those days, it was the man that went out and did the work, got the money, provided for the family, and that would have left the 3 of them in a really difficult situation. So Naomi had heard that the famine had ended and decided to return home. So the journey that she needed to make was just over 30 miles. And nowadays, 30 miles doesn't seem massively far, particularly if you can go by car or train or whatever. But it would have taken them 7 to 10 days to walk that far. And that would have been taking everything that they owned with them. She may have regretted the move to Moab in the first place. We don't know. But she's now lost her husband and both of her sons. And all she can think to do is return home, though there would have been wider family to support her. So Naomi set out on this journey with Orpah and Ruth. And sometime into the journey, she realised that her 2 daughters-in-law didn't need to leave their familiar land and enter a new land with her and a different culture with a different God. Although Naomi was going to have the chance to find her family where she was going, Ruth and Orpah would be leaving their old families behind for good. And they may not be accepted in the same way. Naomi prayed that God would bless them and prayed that he would give them the security of another husband. And Orpah decided she would return to her own people and her own land where she would be looked after and hopefully for her find the new husband to support her. And Ruth had that same choice. She had the choice whether to return with Naomi or not. This was not an easy choice. She'd be leaving everything she knew, and she didn't know what the future held. It was going to be a difficult journey, potentially a dangerous journey. And when she arrived as a foreigner, she wouldn't necessarily be treated well. So I'm going to read a little bit from the chapter from Ruth after Orpah decided to leave. And again they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. "Look," Naomi said to her, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same." But Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be your God, my God. Whenever you die, wherever you die, I die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." And when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. Ruth did not know what the future would hold. But she wasn't just relying on Naomi, but she was also relying on God. When she said, "Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God," she wasn't just highlighting that she was choosing to follow Naomi, but she was also highlighting that she was choosing to follow God. If you think about what faith means, it's that complete trust or confidence or belief in something or someone without any proof. Ruth, in this case, is showing she's got faith in God. We don't have proof that God's there, but she has that faith that he is, and that he will support her and he will bless her decision to follow him and travel with Naomi. Often, when you choose to become a Christian, you have a point where you make that decision to follow Jesus. And that decision isn't always easy and often comes with a cost. People talk about making a leap of faith, and sometimes when you choose to follow Jesus, that's what it feels like you're doing. Maybe it's like when I was stood at the top of the cathedral last year, ready to abseil off the roof. That leap off there, I knew I would be perfectly safe. I had a rope holding me, but it was still very hard to take that step backwards off the cathedral and go down. You are stepping into the unknown. And often when you choose to follow Jesus, that's the same thing. You're stepping into that unknown. You don't know what it's going to be like. And the rope in the abseil is like Jesus by your side, stopping you from falling. When I chose to become a Christian, I didn't have to walk 30 miles or move to a strange town, but I did choose to change the way I was living my life. I was a student at the time. I chose to meet other Christians and find a church to attend. I chose to spend time reading the Bible and find out more about Christianity and this new faith. I chose to move away from bad influences and to put God first in my life. And many of my friends and family found this change difficult, and it did impact my relationship with those people. But when God calls us to follow him, we need to put him first. And that means leaving behind things in our life that distract us from following him. This might be family that are stopping us. It might be friends. It might be things that we are doing. If our focus is on following God and following his will, then everything else will fall into place. When we had that song just now, the words of my mouth, and the chorus that says, "I will follow you," that's what I chose to choose when I became a Christian. I chose to follow God as much as I possibly could, and change my lifestyle to work with that. And that is what Ruth chose to do. She chose to follow God with Naomi and go with her. It's not always an easy choice to follow Jesus. We don't always know the way. We don't know what will happen. But we do know that he will go with us. I've lost my page. Here we go. When Ruth chose to follow God, this meant for her leaving her homeland, her friends, and her original family relationships too, and just chose instead to go with Naomi, her mother-in-law. And as a result of Ruth's choice, Naomi kept Ruth as a daughter, despite not expecting it when she told Ruth and Orpah to return to their own lives. So as I said, Joseph's getting married this summer, my son, and I was really pleased when I heard the news. Saula, his fiancée, is really lovely, and they are really well suited. And when somebody said to me, "How do you feel about the fact you're going to be a mother-in-law?" I was suddenly quite apprehensive. You hear so many nightmare stories about mothers-in-law, although my mother-in-law is lovely. But I didn't want to be the mother-in-law. I wanted to have a good relationship with Saula and not be stuck by the connotations of that title. And even though I'm not officially Saula's mother-in-law yet, on Mother's Day this year, I had a message from Saula separately to Joseph. And she said, "Happy Mother's Day. Thank you for sharing your love with me and welcoming me into your family." And I was so pleased, because that's the kind of mother-in-law I want to be. And that's the kind of mother-in-law that I imagine Naomi was with Ruth. We are not continuing into chapter 2 of Ruth today, so you will have to wait for next week to find out what happens next when they reach Naomi's homeland. However, you can read the book of Ruth at home. It is a very short book. I like the short books in the Bible. You can feel quite good about yourself for reading them. And if anyone needs a Bible to read it from, do let us know. Ruth wasn't anything special, but she chose to follow God, whatever happened going forward. She went into the unknown rather than turning back to the familiar. So the question is, what about us? Just like with Ruth, it's not always easy to continue to follow Jesus. We don't know the way. We don't know what will happen. But we do know that he will go with us. So I'm just going to end with a prayer. Father God, thank you for the story of Ruth in the Bible that we can use to learn more about you. Thank you for the example of her faith and how she followed you. Help us to choose to follow you, even when it is hard. In your name, amen.